Welcome back, friend. For those who are new here, I'm Patrina with Homegrown Florida, and I am just so excited to show you my 3 absolute favorite calendula recipes. These are DIY at-home medicinal recipes that you can create from flowers that you grow in your garden, specifically calendula flowers. Now, if you're not familiar with calendula, it's also called a pot marigold, and they come in lots of different colors. But this particular variety I get from the urbanharvest.com, and it is a more potent type or style of flower that actually has more of the medicinal properties in it if you wanted to use it for medicinal recipes that we're going to be doing today. Now, calendula has a lot of really cool benefits, but one of the ones that stands out the most is it's like antibacterial, and it helps heal things like scratches, rashes, sunburns, all kinds of like skin conditions. So the first step we need to do after we pick the flowers is I like to dry mine. You can do them fresh, but I like to dry them. It just reduces the chance of mold. And I just air dry them out for a couple days. After that, I put them in a glass jar, stuffing it as full as I can possibly make it, and then I fill it with an oil. Typically I use olive oil, but I had this sunflower seed oil that I used on another project that I kind of need to get rid of because I don't really have anything else to use it with. So I used a sunflower seed oil. I've used sweet almond oil in the past. I've used lots of different oils. And then I put that on the shelf for 6 to 8 weeks. Set a reminder on your phone to come back and check on it. And then once that time has elapsed, you can strain off the oil from the flowers. This is going to give you the calendula infused oil that we're going to use in the rest of the recipes. But if you don't happen to have the 6 to 8 week time to let it infuse, there is a faster way to infuse it, which is you could put the flowers and the oil in, I like to use a little mini crock pot or some sort of double boiler, and cook it basically in a very light simmer for 6 to 8 hours. That's why I like to use a little mini crock pot, because I can kind of set it and forget it and walk away in the morning and come back in the evening and it's infused. I've done that before, and I feel like the medicinal properties are still good that way, but I feel like this way you get much more intense medicinal properties, probably because we're not really heating the oil. We're letting it gently infuse over a longer period of time. The first recipe that we're going to make is a whipped shea butter calendula body butter. I know, there's a lot of words, a mouthful really. But it's a whipped shea butter. The cool thing about this particular recipe is it doesn't require any cooking, no heating up, no nothing. You can do this all in a bowl. So I start out with some shea butter. I'm going to put the recipe for this down into the description. I found it on the website humblebee.me.com. Really great website for DIY medicinals, and being as we're going to use some of that calendula oil that we grew in our own garden, I'm so excited about being able to grow stuff and then convert it into a cool recipe like this one. Now, I've done this one before. I absolutely adore it. The cool thing about this recipe and her website is there's 3 different recipes. There's a 4 ingredient, a 5 ingredient, and a 9 ingredient. I'm doing the 9 ingredient because I've done the different ones and I feel like the 9 is just the best one. And I'll describe to you why I think that is through this. But the 4 and the 5 are really great for like beginners. If this is your first time ever making something like skincare products at home, then you can start out with the more simple recipe. You don't have to buy as many products and all those things. And the cool thing about her recipe is she kind of explains what the different ingredients are doing so that you can sub things out. So don't be afraid to sub things out. So we started out with the unrefined shea butter. I'm adding in my calendula. If you notice, there is a scale underneath my glass bowl there. I like to make sure that I am measuring everything perfectly by using the gram measurements from my scale. I feel like that just always works a little bit better. So the recipe that she has us doing with the 9 ingredients is starting out with the shea butter, and then you're going to go with the carrier oil. And the carrier oil that we're using is the calendula oil, and the rest of that sunflower seed oil that we originally used to infuse the calendula oil. So I'm just trying to use this up. I'm going to probably use it on every recipe I can until it's done. I have no other use for it, right? The next oils that she adds to the recipe is going to be vitamin E oil, and this is kind of like a preservative oil. It's going to help keep these body butters good over a longer period of time. And then we're also going to add some lavender essential oil. You can really use any scent you want. And honestly, if you didn't want to add scents like essential oil scents and you wanted it to be unscented, maybe you're sensitive to those kinds of things, no worries. You can do this completely unscented. One of the reasons why I love this particular recipe. And if you're not like a fan of lavender, you can go with anything. Chamomile, you could do lemongrass, you could do whatever you like. I particularly like vanilla. I'm surprised I didn't do vanilla. I actually did lavender. But if you do none of them, you're actually going to get the smell of the calendula flowers, which is quite nice and very, very gentle. It's not very strong at all. Once we have all the wet ingredients together, we need to blend it up. Now, this is where the magic actually occurs, and this takes a little bit of time because the shea butter is not softened in any way. It's not heated up in any way. So you're kind of like letting the blender heat it up to allow it to become whipped and softened. And it does take a minute. So take your time with this particular step. I have found that this body butter is the absolute most amazing thing to use for after shaving. So after you've shaved your face, guys, or ladies, your legs, and you get like the razor burns or the irritation or the little rash, like I just immediately put this on and I have never felt so good after using a skincare product from the store from shaver burn or razor burn. And this stuff, I put it on and I can't even tell that I just shaved. Like I have no issues whatsoever. It is now one of my favorites. Now, her recipe calls for a powder ingredients, which is going to be the cornstarch, which we'll do here in a second, and some colored mica. I don't know what that is, but it's a powder. I went with soap dye because I had some soap dye and I figured soap dye, probably wasn't going to stain. This is kind of like the essential oils. You don't actually have to use any kind of coloring. The calendula, it's a little hard to see in this video, but it kind of looks white, but honestly, it's like a pale yellow. It's actually very pretty. So if you are fine with the more natural, you don't have to put any colors in here. If you wanted to get even more natural, but you did want color, a cool thing to do would be to take some roselle or maybe some like mulberries that are very, very, very dried and use that. Now, I will say that if you're going to use something like roselle or mulberries to naturally color your body butter, I'm not sure how long it will last. Since those are, products that can go bad. I'm not sure how long it'll last, so don't hold me to that. I went ahead with soap dye because I kind of wanted it to be a cute pink color. Once again, it would be a nice little lovely light yellow if you left it in its natural state. I'm scraping down the bowl here just to make sure that the shea butter that's in there, there's no more chunks, because that's really the big thing here is you just got to keep blending and blending and blending until the shea butter is no longer in those little chunks or graininess. That's why it takes a while. So once again, take your time here, go over it a couple of times. This is also when I went ahead and added my cornstarch, and the cornstarch is designed to take away some of like the oily, greasy texture of the shea butter. Shea butter is very, very like greasy, very hydrating, but very greasy. And I honestly think that I could have went with a little bit more cornstarch. It's still a little bit on the greasy side. So heavy-handed with the cornstarch, it would be my recommendation so that way, the body butter isn't so greasy. Last but not least, we're going to package this up. Now, her recipe is a very small recipe. It's going to make basically one application of it. I went ahead and multiplied her recipe by 10. I want you to hear that, times 10. And it's using, it has enough, or it made enough to fill 3 quarter-size pint jars. So quarter of a pint jars. So that's 10 times the recipe to make quarter of a pint jars, or 3 quarter of a pint jars. Man, that's hard to say. That is a tongue twister right there. But you can see that it's better to make kind of a larger amount, and then you only have to make it like once a year. Like I feel like these three are probably going to last me for a full year, and I'll just put them in these jars. I'm not going to put the regular rings and bands. I've had issues in the past when I made my own skincare products that the metal lids and bands sometimes rust from these products. So instead, I'm going to use a plastic top for these that is a good seal. The next recipe we're going to work on is probably going to be the easiest skincare recipe you could ever make, and this is a Calendula Salve. So it's really like almost like a ointment. Think like an A&D ointment, but thicker. So we start out with 1 ounce of beeswax pellets. I got those in my Amazon store. If you're interested, I have all of the products that you see on here, including all of the things that we use, in my Amazon store. So check that out. And then we're going to add into it 5 ounces of calendula oil. Now you could do a little bit less if you want the finished product to be harder, but I wouldn't go below 4 ounces. If you want it to be more of a softer, you can add a little bit more of the calendula oil or a little bit less of the beeswax. I kind of like a harder consistency. This is something that we typically use for sunburns, for scrapes, scratches, mosquito bites, which happens a lot, but really like any kind of boo-boo, like, you know what I'm saying? And so I don't want it to be like very soft. I want it to be hard. This generally makes about 2 containers, or we'll show those in just a second. But the hardest part about this one is the double boiler and just taking your time. Like I'm actually simmering a little hard here, and I wish I would have turned it down because you don't really want to disrupt or hurt the medicinal qualities of the calendula oil by heating it up too high. You also don't want to break your glass that you are heating it up in. I'm using a Pyrex measuring cup here. So you want to put something underneath it. I have like a little, I think it's like a silicone trivet that's underneath there to make sure it's not touching the bottom of the pan. Otherwise, this thing might crack and break, and then we're in for a big mess. And then you just really have to take your time, just slow and steady heating it up. And I'm swishing it around with a chopstick here. You can use a spoon, whatever, but I try to use things that I can throw away because it's going to have this thickened texture on it when you're done, and it's really hard to clean. The last thing that I add to it, once all of the beeswax pellets are melted and everything is combined nice, I'm going to add in 2 full droppers of tea tree oil. This is optional. You can add essential oils for smells. You can add things like tea tree oil for, you know, medicinal qualities. That's really the reason I added it, because it's kind of like a very healing element that I think is a good addition to this one. It doesn't smell the greatest, or at least I don't think it smells the greatest, but the calendula kind of makes it not smell quite so medicinal. Medicine-y is the best way I know how to say. But the properties of it is very good. It's very healing. It works very quickly. If you have a sunburn and you put this on, it is night and day difference by the time you wake up the next day. Night and day difference. So good. So the last step in this process is to pour it into these little tins. These I think are 4-ounce tins, but they only fill up about 3/4 of the way with this recipe, and it's only 2 of them. I'm starting to run short on calendula oil, which was surprising to me because I had a whole pint jar there. But they're starting to get slim here. I'm gonna have to grow some more calendula. I go through all of this stuff so quickly. A little time lapse here to show you how they solidify, and so that you can see that light yellow color that we talked about earlier. That's the natural color with the natural medicinal properties and the tea tree. Our last recipe is going to be a calendula lotion bar. This one is very similar to the body butter, except this one is heated up, so it's going to infuse and collect together better, I think. But it's a harder application. It's not as soft as the body butter. The body butter is very, very soft. So this one is a super simple recipe. It's equal parts by weight. So I start out with the calendula oil, all the one that I had left. I measured that because that's what's going to determine how much unrefined shea butter I use and how much of the beeswax pellets that I use. You can see we're using or reusing a lot of the same ingredients in this particular recipe. So we're just going to weigh it out, however much calendula you have, and then I'm going to equal that to the weight of how much shea butter and then how much beeswax pellets. And this time I'm actually using my little mini crock pot that you see right behind it, that little black mini crock pot. I like to use this one when I've got other things going on. I stick it in a mason jar. I put my little silicone trivet down into the crock pot so that the glass jar is not touching the bottom of the crock pot, because even though this, heats up slowly over a longer period of time, it still could potentially crack the jar, and I don't want to deal with that, especially since this is the last calendula oil I have, so I wanted to be careful. So I put the little trivet down in there, and then I set this jar in this little mini crock pot and I walk away. Like hours later I come back and it will all have melted, and it's not having to babysit it on the stove like we had to do with the Salve. This particular product I really, really like for feet. A lotion bar is really good anywhere where you have like dry skin. So I'm thinking like elbows, hands, but in particular the heels of my feet. I run around in flip-flops and outside, and I'm tough on my feet. And so these are really good. Like if you have that kind of problem where you have a lot of like callus or peeling or anything like that, just your feet aren't very soft. These lotion bars are great because they're a great shape to just rub over the bottom of your feet. They have a stiffness or a hardness texture to them, so it's not just like crumbling like the body butter. And I go ahead and add lots of scents. I actually went with an amber essential oil right here because I wanted to give it like that nighttime smell, like something to kind of calm me down at night, not something that wakes you up, something soothing. You could do chamomile. There's a lot of different scents, but I did amber, and I was so glad I did because I feel like it's just so relaxing. I came back a couple hours later and you can see like all of that has softened and is ready to be mixed together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into some silicone molds. I have these really cute silicone molds that I like. They make flowers. I think they're so pretty. Now we just simply add it to the silicone trays. I usually get about 4 and I don't fill them up all the way. I used to fill them up all the way, but I noticed that we weren't going through them as quickly and they kind of get, I don't know, a little bit messy after a while. So I wanted to do like half ones because I feel like this would be like the perfect size for like a single serving. I let these sit on my countertop for a whole night. I came back the next morning, so about 12 hours, and they were ready to go. They were nice and solidified. You could stick them in the refrigerator. That would probably speed them up. Same with the calendula Salve, but you could just leave it on your counter and they should solidify. I like doing it this way versus the refrigerator because if for some reason you had put too much beeswax, you would see that it became too hard, or if you didn't put enough beeswax, you would see that it's too soft, and you could potentially put it right back into the crock pot to melt it down and add more of the material that you want. So if you wanted it to be harder, you would add more of the beeswax pellets, and if you wanted it to be softer, you would add a little bit more of the calendula oil or the shea butter. That's just a little tip there if it's not coming out to the texture that you personally want. You want it to hold its shape, but how soft it is once it does hold its shapes is really just a personal preference. I would love to hear if you guys are going to try one of these recipes out. Head down to the comments and let me know. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today as we used all of our calendula flowers from our spring harvest. I am going to be growing some more here in fall and spring, and every opportunity that I can to grow calendula, I grow it so that I can harvest these amazing flowers. If you want to learn more about growing vegetables in your backyard garden, make sure to check out my new ebook, Homegrown Florida Gardening Guide, at my website, homegrownfloridagarden.com. Make sure to pick up your copy today and you will have all the information you need to be a successful gardener.